And that shows that there have been signals of worrying of the external developments upon China's economy and what that will mean, and also issues internally. And so for Xi to say that, again, it shows resilience, it shows continuity.
Recently, international news headlines have been dominated by US President Donald Trump's trade tariffs and his disregard for the rules-based international order. Trump has threatened to take control of Greenland, the Panama Canal and Gaza, and sided with invader Russia while withdrawing US support for Ukraine. His tariff threats have raised questions about long-standing alliances and the future of the global trading system, leaving many allies, including the EU, confused as they brace themselves for an uncertain future. The world's second largest economy, China, has also been the recipient of President Trump's mounting trade tariffs. So how do China view all of these developments? Coming up, we speak with Alexander Davy, research analyst at MERICS, about China's perspectives on the shifting geopolitical landscape, how recent events might impact China's relationship with the EU, and how China's struggling domestic economy will influence their path forward. Hello and welcome to Perspectives with Nilo. I'm your host, Neil O'Sullivan. If you are new to the podcast, we've got over 50 past episodes waiting for you, and you can explore all of them on our blog at pwnilo.com or by searching for Perspectives with Nilo wherever you get your podcasts. And we'd really appreciate a like, follow or subscribe if you enjoy our content. And thanks in advance for your support. The Chinese have a phrase that goes "xia ji jing ho," which literally translates to kill the chicken to scare the monkey, and means to make an example of someone to warn others, essentially punishing a smaller person to intimidate a larger one. I wonder if this phrase resonated with Xi Jinping and the Chinese Communist Party recently as they observed Donald Trump's moves in the early weeks of his presidency. Most observers will agree that Donald Trump's actions have resulted in significant deviations from established domestic and global norms. In the area of foreign policy, President Trump's administration has focused on asserting US power while slashing US assistance across the globe. In the area of trade, while Trump has flip-flopped on his tariffs against Canada and Mexico, China remains the only consistent target of escalating US tariffs. Surely an unwelcome development when China's domestic economy is struggling and the country is even more reliant on exports. To understand how China is perceiving all of this, I am delighted to welcome back Alexander Davy to the podcast. Alexander is a research analyst at MERICS, the Mercator Institute for China Studies based in Berlin. And we've previously spoken to him about his analysis of Ireland-China relations in the European think tank network report on China. So hello, Alex, and you're very welcome back to the podcast.
Thanks very much for having me, Neil.
Maybe we'll dive straight into it. And we've all heard the latest protectionist rhetoric from Donald Trump and his administration. On the EU, he says that the US has a $300 billion deficit. More recently, during his first cabinet meeting, he said that the EU was formed to screw the United States. And he talked about 25% tariffs coming down the line. We've also seen a radical shift in the US approach to Russia and many other examples. So China is obviously observing all of this. So as a China analyst, how do you think they are viewing it? And how do you think China might capitalize on the frustration that is spreading against Trump in the democratic world?
Yeah, I think this is a good question to see how it looks from Beijing. There's a meme online of China where it's do nothing and then win. And this is kind of that situation where China really, or Beijing really sees like, wow, Trump has really gone after issues with EU-China trade relations or EU-US trade relations, and also the EU not really being seeming to be at the table with negotiations around Ukraine, has really dismissed the EU and all of this. And for the Chinese, they have to, for them, for Beijing, they say, we just keep doing what we do, which is seeing where we can cooperate, where where Europe lands after this, because the transatlantic relationship is seriously suffering right now. And we just had an election here in Germany, and Chancellor Merz, or prospective Chancellor Friedrich Merz from the Christian Democratic Union Party, he's saying that Germany cannot rely on the US, and that they need to deal with a lot of these things themselves, and that's very telling, and that echoes past ideas from France of strategic autonomy, um, with the retraction of the US security umbrella. And so for the Chinese, they say, okay, great. Could this be like 2017, where we have things to get better between Europe and China? Is there a way to have them engage with us more, and maybe see things a little bit more from our perspective?
And what would like a better relationship with the EU look like for China? What kind of things are they looking to achieve, do you think?
Well, they talk about wanting to uphold the multilateral system, which is something that EU countries want to do, and they want to maintain some sort of structure and order among international institutions, and way of resolving conflicts. And in many ways, that fits with what Europe wants, but at the same time, we see China pushing to reform many of these institutions. It sees it as they're not treated fairly in a lot of these institutions, and so if Europe is still supporting this multilateral system, it means that China can still pursue its interests of reforming it in its own needs, to suit its own needs. But if you have a country like the US stepping away from these multilateral institutions, that it doesn't allow for this pressure to be maintained on China to reform it in a way that meets China's needs completely. And so the cantilever, the balance that the US provides in these institutions is important, because it means that any changes are slow and gradual, and have to meet approval of all states technically, but of major powers for sure.
So it's kind of back to hide your power. Well, maybe not hide your power as much, but certainly bide your time. They're willing to be patient to get what they want.
The signals out of Beijing these days is to continue as they have been planning to go on over the last, ever since Xi Jinping came to power in 2012, and then president in 2013. And so what's most important or most significant about this is that, with so much turmoil globally and geopolitically, and also with difficulties at home, the fact that China consistently wants to move in this direction, both domestically and internationally, shows a level of determination and willingness to stick to its plan, that is quite striking, given how turbulent the geopolitical situation is.
One of the things that was in the works between the EU and China until there were various upsets was this comprehensive agreement on investment. And I think it was put in ice back in 2020 or so. There were sanctions imposed by both sides and so on. How important is this for the EU-China relationship?
Well, the EU-China relationship, since the comprehensive agreement on investment was put on hold back in 2020, has managed to develop, not as well as as Beijing would have liked, but even Wang Yi recently talked about that he's paused the Communist Party is pleased with the development of Europe-China relations, and so it doesn't seem to be such a major sticking point. The major sticking point is, if Beijing wants to reignite the talks around the comprehensive agreement, and for Europe, it's saying, well, we have to go back to why it was put on hold. because Beijing says, we'll drop our sanctions on you if you drop your sanctions on us, and let's all forget about it and move forward. But the question was, the human rights abuses in Xinjiang, which have been well documented regarding whether it was the camps or sacred and cultural sites that have been erased. And that's a conversation that the EU has always been wanting to have, and hasn't been able to engage China with that ever since the trade of sanctions.
It was recently reported that Ursula von der Leyen said that in relation to China, quote, I think we can find agreements that could even expand our trade and investment ties. It's a fine line that we need to walk, but it can lead us to a fairer and more balanced relationship with one of the world's economic giants. And that can make sense for Europe. So is there already a softening happening in attitudes towards China in the EU as a result of Trump's policies, do you think?
I don't think that has happened in any material way so far. This is a change in rhetoric, and as far as I understand it, it's to let the Trump administration know that if damaging transatlantic relations and trying to put tariffs on Europe when it's trying to cooperate on many issues, will force Europe to try and balance its ties with other major powers. And so it's letting Washington know that because as it does not seem that Europe is a major piece on the chessboard for the Trump administration, that it doesn't matter so much. And by saying something like this, it's saying, hey, take us into consideration, understand that we have our own interests too, and also by us aligning with you on transatlantic issues, it means that we are de-risking on China. It means that we are trying to cooperate in many ways as possible. And so when you start doing damage to that, it causes us to reconsider and makes us see what our options are that are in our own best interests if you are pursuing your own.
Yeah, that's very, very interesting. And I suppose China, one of the appointments they've made recently is that of Liu Xiaoye to the Chinese government's special representative for European affairs. It seems strange, given his acrimonious past as China's ambassador to France. Do you have any thoughts on Liu Xiaoye's new appointment and how important this role might be?
Yeah, well, Liu Xiaoye was one of these wolf warriors, and he had, I think, as ambassador to China's ambassador to France, had said that Ukraine has no sovereignty, and saying these kind of inflammatory words did not help and did not, from Beijing's perspective, for China to attain its own goals and its own interests, and so the fact that he has received this job in Europe, in Brussels, from Beijing, is this a promotion, or is this seen as rewarding such behavior? The thing is, we don't know exactly how Beijing ranks these positions. For example, being an ambassador to France could be seen as a very high-ranking position, whereas being ambassador to Brussels, or towards the EU, it's always been understood from Beijing as a very difficult institution to understand, to deal with, to make progress in, and so it may not actually be a promotion. So that's the only way I could understand it, because Liu Xiaoye's actions did not aid China's Ministry of Foreign Affairs achieve its goals in strengthening relations between China and France.
And so, speaking of wolf warriors, one of China's lead wolf warriors, I suppose, is Foreign Minister Wang Yi. He recently visited Ireland on February 16th and 17th. This was the second senior Chinese official to visit Ireland in just over a year. And it was interesting that China's pre-meeting press release said that the visit was at the invitation of Taoiseach Simon Harris. However, the Irish government's announcement said the opposite, that the meeting was taking place at the request of the Chinese government. people say that Chinese officials never visit without a reason. And so it brings to mind that Aretha Franklin song, which was Who's Zooming Who? So my question is, who is zooming who here? What is going on with this recent, what would appear to be an uptick of China's interest in Ireland?
I think I've had conversations with other analysts and people who are focused on Europe-China relations on this, and it's not there. There is often a reason and a rationale for why Chinese officials, especially top leaders like Wang Yi on the Politburo of the Chinese Communist Party, but it could also be a little bit more simple that he was going to the UK and Ireland is next door. Ireland has a new government, and they need to stabilize relations with the new government and make sure that there's continuity and especially with the new ambassador moving in. So this is a big signal, and it shows, well, this is killing two birds with one stone. So there's the aspect of the closeness to just popping over from London to Dublin, the new government, but also that Ireland in many ways is kind of the door to the EU in many ways, and it's kind of seen as not so hawkish on China compared to a country like Sweden, or maybe even the Netherlands or other countries or Czech Republic, for example, which would be the most critical of Beijing. And so it's not that Ireland is a best friend like Hungary, but it's neither. And it's kind of has that space to go there. And when there's probably not many options on the table within the EU, it made sense to do that with the new government.
And yeah, as you mentioned or alluded to, this is, I think, his first visit also to Ireland. He's visited Europe many times, but his actual first visit to Ireland. And you mentioned there, China recently appointed a new ambassador to Ireland. I believe his name is Zhao Xiyuan. He replaces He Xiandong. I looked on China's Ministry of Foreign Affairs website. His curriculum vitae is quite brief. Do we know anything about him, his background, or what the significance is in this new appointment, or is it just the normal rotation?
It's interesting that you asked this, because I did check this out last week, and I was curious as to who this new ambassador was, because He Xiandong had come from, I think it was South Sudan, and he's had quite an interesting career in many countries, both in the global north and the global south. So he seems to be quite well respected in that sense. And this new ambassador Zhao Xiyuan seems to have not been an ambassador before. So it seems to be his first role as ambassador, and for that to be in Ireland, and that to me, I would also need to see, apart from his, state titles, I would also need to see what his party titles are to understand where he stands within the party ranking. Because as far as I can see, he's within the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. He wouldn't be quite very highly ranked, and so that to me, only based on this limited amount of information, would see a lowering of Ireland in the importance of the priority list of countries through an action like that.
I suppose the other thing in relation to maybe China-Ireland discussions is there's been a lot of talk in Ireland since the election about Ireland's neutrality. And I think both Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael mentioned it in their election manifestos, but they seem to be planning to modify or maybe get rid of the triple lock. Do you think China care whether a country like Ireland maintains the triple lock or not?
To be quite frank, I don't think they do care. Ireland, has served China as an inspiration for its foreign direct investment model, for the historical similarities and ways of cooperating, of understanding issues of colonization, but also working in multilateral systems, working on aid, like development in foreign countries. I think China appreciates Ireland's neutrality, but I think the triple lock system isn't. Ireland removing it is not exactly a threat to China in this sense. What and if it was a threat, I think we would not have seen the change in ambassadors because He Xiangdong was quite eloquent, seemed relatively liked, but also did not shy away from uh, addressing Beijing's interests, even if it stood on the toes of Irish officials. And so someone like him would have been very useful to keep in his position as this debate around Ireland's military neutrality develops.
I think his last hurrah, as I mentioned in a previous podcast, was he complained about 5 Irish senators visiting Taiwan. He complained to the Oireachtas. But yeah, he knew, I suppose, he wasn't shy in speaking out, that's for sure. You alluded to earlier on at the beginning of the interview about, China has problems at home. And we have been hearing a lot recently about the dire state of their domestic economy. The property market has collapsed. There's high unemployment, low consumer confidence. And in a recent opinion piece I read in Newsweek by Gordon Chang, who is admittedly a China hawk, he said China is having its 2008 downturn moment, was how he put it. So what are your thoughts on the state of China's domestic economy, and how do you think it may impact their decision making in regard to dealing with Trump's protectionism and so on?
I think it's interesting to take the geopolitical events into consideration when looking at China's domestic situation, and I think Xi Jinping is very much aware of this because in the Politburo meeting from this week, and I think it was the Politburo meeting, or else there was a press, some sort of like a meeting where they were discussing before this 2 sessions next week, the meeting of China's national legislature, and Xi Jinping had told. He's speaking to his party and to the cadres in his party to remain calm and level-headed, and that we continue to move forward in the direction that we intend. And that shows that there have been signals of worrying of the external developments upon China's economy and what that will mean, and also issues internally. And so for Xi to say that, again, it shows resilience, it shows continuity. But if we are to understand this more broadly speaking, China has made a decision many, many years ago to pursue a modernization and industrial upgrading of its industry and its science and technology system. And this is a decision that the party makes because they believe it's the only way to survive and for China to thrive. And so it's very difficult to deviate from this path that they have set out before them. There are adjustments, and we see these adjustments in certain stimulus packages that we saw last year, and issues to contain the housing crisis when you have major developers like Evergrande or Vanke, and they need to contain this bubble and deflate it carefully. And we're seeing this these adjustments, but so far there's been no major hesitation from Beijing in response to what's happening externally. Internally, yes, what we see is that yes, the housing crisis. We see issues of youth unemployment. We see sluggish growth, and that's why we see something now called the Private Economy Promotion Law, which is a law that is meant to boost the confidence of private businesses and entrepreneurs to get back out there and do business, but in specific mandated areas by the CCP. So that's one way that they're trying to deal with it.
And I saw Xi Jinping himself met with tech leaders, including Jack Ma, who had disappeared for a long time, but he met with a group of them very recently. So, do you think this is a sign of change in government policies to perhaps boost the private sector, as you say?
So I don't think there's any major changes coming, and that's the problem, right? You have to try and boost the confidence of your entrepreneurs to expand consumption and to stimulate the economy. But what has actually ultimately changed? So what has changed is that China is saying, look, you can do business, you can make money in these areas that we're laying out. We will try and support you as best as we can. You must stay in line with these in these areas, and not only do you make money, they also must benefit the country. And so it's very, very difficult. You're asking business people to make money, but also to think of the people at the same time. Um, and I guess if there's opportunities, if there's abilities for money to be made in specific areas where there is breakthroughs in certain science and technological areas, entrepreneurs will go in that direction. They will develop and they will make money and try and export abroad. But how much it can help is still an open question to me. And I also think that that's why this symposium was gathered, to show you are the most important business leaders in these specific tech industries like agri-tech, robotics, semiconductors, electric vehicles. You lead the way. You show how good it can be. You will be rewarded for this, and if everyone else follows after you.
It's essentially a pep talk. There's no financial stimulus behind it.
There will be. They're trying to cut red tape in specific areas. So there are difficulties with getting loans, the interest rates of loans. There is difficulty with access to land. To get workers, they also want talent. They need specifically trained workers, so they need the government to provide educated young people, and so certain resource access to resources, may also state contracts to sell these products to the state, and so forth. So they are supposed to ease this red tape and make it easier. What is very striking is that this law is meant to protect private businesses from the state itself, because you have an issue on the local level where local government is in debt and they're scrambling for revenue for local government for goods for services, public services to run, and they call it deep sea fishing. And what it is essentially a shakedown by party cadres of businesses where they find them, or they're trying to get unpaid taxes to fund the local government. And this law is meant to stop that. So this law is like it's like slapping yourself on the wrist. We need to see, how does the private sector respond to this? Do they believe it? Do they trust it? Will these people start? Will the local government cadres stop going after them? And what is likely is that we probably need to see some examples being made out of party cadres for these offences, in order for private businesses to believe that they can do business without interference from the state.
Okay, interesting to watch and see how that develops, like you mentioned. You have written also about China's efforts to make healthcare more accessible by lowering drug prices. And that hasn't altogether been a great success either. Can you tell us more about what's going on in that area?
Yeah, so in China, they have a system called volume-based procurement. And it's a way of getting a large amount of drugs accessible to the people of China at very low prices, and it's to make healthcare accessible. The issue is that this is very, very difficult for pharmaceutical companies, especially generic ones, because the profit margins are so low. And so in order for them to, you know, even pay back their costs, they need to what essentially they're finding out is that they're cutting corners, that the effectiveness or the therapeutic effect of drugs as simple as ibuprofen and paracetamol aren't working the same way as they would where if you had branded products from the US or Europe. And this is very distressing for Chinese people because they believe that that they can't trust these drugs, and it creates a lack of trust within people, and then they will try and get access to foreign drugs, and the China's trying to do the self-reliance push where in many sectors they're trying to replace foreign brands with domestic brands. But with what's coming out now, there's surely going to be a rush on foreign branded drugs, and it's worrying because they did the doctors in Shanghai raised this issue through the correct political avenues, and it was taken seriously at first, and there was it was looked into, and they were also looking into the statistics of the effectiveness of these drugs, and saw that a lot of the data was copied and pasted from the numbers from the effects of branded drugs was just copied and pasted into the effects of generic drugs to show that, oh yeah, they both work the same way. Um, and so it seems like in the last few weeks I haven't heard so much on it, but that there was some signal from the government saying, no, it's all okay, we've got this under control, you can trust the drugs. And so I'm not quite sure what is happening there. The evidence is quite clear that there is issues in this sector, and there have been a few doctors that have spoken out in various provinces that they're probably going to deal with this, but in a very quiet way because they cannot unsettle people, and they do not want Chinese people to mm, make these decisions and upset the market and upset their strategy. So they will probably go in and deal with it. But if it's a systematic issue, or if it's systemic, they will really struggle to find a way to solve this because they want to keep the drug prices low, and the trade-off on the quality is serious, and it's going to be very difficult. It means that they would have to go back and offer better pricing in the future to generic drug makers for their drugs in order for them to make them in an effective manner.
Yeah, it's an interesting set of circumstances that, again, showing people don't trust the generic Chinese drugs and are willing to spend more, even when the economy is down, to get the more trustworthy supply.
Yeah, and the collective memory of society that they know about these milk powder scandals many years ago, and whatever other food scandals last year. You also had a truck that was, I think, carrying cooking oil, and just 2 or 3 days previously it was carrying, I think it was waste. I'm not sure if it was waste or if it was
Or some other
crude
type
oil.
of oil. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I remember
Yeah,
that. Yeah.
and people had done online sleuthing to find out the paperwork behind this truck of what it was carrying the 3 days before. So this was kind of citizen journalism at its best, and they uncovered this, and so you can see that people are very very aware of whether it's businesses or state-owned enterprises or whatever other actors taking shortcuts, and they want to point it out as quick as possible. And only when these things are brought into the sunlight is the state forced to act.
Yeah, very interesting. So I suppose the next major event on the Chinese political calendar is the two sessions on the first week of March in Beijing. Can we expect anything to emerge there? Or is it just more reaffirmation of the party is number one and so on and so forth?
So at the two sessions next week, so I think it starts on the 4th. March 4th is the Chinese People's Political Consultative Conference, and March 5th, which is the more important of the two, is the National People's Congress. They have their plenary session. So this means that from all the regions and basically constituencies across China, they'll come to Beijing and gather. And in the media, you often see that this is a rubber stamp event because the party makes the decisions and the state follows. I think for this specific event, which is a plenary session, so everybody comes, it is very performative, and it is very a tick the box exercise. What it matters is in the sense of the image it projects of a unified China, of a diverse China, of different regions and ethnicities and everyone being seen, and they're all happy to come, and they're all in their the dress of their region or ethnic minority background. And so visually and in the mind of creating a like kind of collective idea of a society and a nation, it is very powerful. On a legislative point of view, less so, like I said. But that doesn't mean that the organ, the state or the state institution of the National People's Congress is useless or doesn't have a use. How I describe it is, this: if we take a human body, for example, the Communist Party is a skeleton. It provides structure and shape and form. And what that means is it selects the policy, it selects the direction, it selects the ideas behind it. The National People's Congress and the state, in this sense, what I mean by that is the government of China, is the flesh. And that means that they build on the policy. You have the technocrats, you have the people with expertise who have to take these sometimes broad, sometimes abstract, sometimes esoteric ideas from the Communist Party and make them into something tangible, something implementable, and something that is linked to the lives of people in China. And so it's actually the most difficult job, I would say. And so they are fleshing out the ideas of the Communist Party and trying to make it real and impactful. So they don't signify the direction, but they make it real. And so there is importance there, but it's not of key importance like the party is, who decides what it is that they're going to work on or what direction they're going to go in.
That's Alexander Davy, who is a research analyst with MERICS in Berlin, speaking with me on February 28th last. My sincere thanks to Alexander for sharing his valuable insights with us on Perspectives with Nilo. Since our interview, the US doubled their tariff levy on China, increasing it from 10% to 20% on March 4th, and citing Beijing's alleged failure to curb the export of the deadly opioid fentanyl to the US. And although Trump may have flip-flopped on his tariffs against Canada, Mexico and other countries, as we said at the outset, China remains the only consistent target of escalating US tariffs, which now average over 30% when combined with tariffs imposed during Trump's first term. China has urged the US to return to dialogue as soon as possible, but has also toughened its rhetoric. Last week, a Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesman tweeted, quote, "If the United States persists in waging a tariff war, a trade war, or any other kind of war, the Chinese side will fight them to the bitter end." End quote. That statement was retweeted by the Chinese embassy in Washington. No doubt there are many more twists and turns ahead. We've placed links to references and additional information for all the topics discussed in this episode in the Dive Deeper section of our blog, and you can find it at pwnilo.com. That's pwneilo.com. Recently, we've noticed that many of our listeners are not subscribed. So if you enjoy our content, we'd really appreciate it if you could hit that subscribe or follow button on your favourite listening app so that you don't miss out on future episodes. It would also help us a lot and is the best way to support our efforts. And thanks in advance for your support. But that's where we leave it for now. Thank you again for listening, and until the next time, Slán agus beannacht.